would like to say about the UK and how I think it has gone astray. Don't get me wrong, it ain't all bad. I love the crazy fads, like England always buggering up. But you know we're gonna win the World Cup. I'm gonna stand the old nation with the tales of preservation. I'm gonna stand the old nation with the tales of preservation.
Keep the red flag flying here.
Oh, that was a good song.
Fabulous. And we go, Paul.
We're on, John. It's all yours.
Welcome to Political Unmuted. You'll notice that Paul's been working really very hard on the introduction. And it's not just four people talking aimlessly for a while. Thank you very much. Whoa, he started screen sharing and we're getting very excited. I don't know what's happening here. Anyway.
Teething problems, John.
It wouldn't be political if it didn't go wrong. So I have my three normal guests with me: Paul Daly, the fantastic chair of Setchfield CLP; Stuart Sutherland, the fantastic membership officer; and then from Shildon, poultry woman supreme, chicken thief.
Chicken thief.
Samantha Townsend. And I think we've got a jingle, have we? Oh, you're just killing me. Right, it is the moment of the week. Welcome to all my guests. Let's start with Sam. What's your moment of the week?
Hello. Well, first of all, I've been asked a very serious question. Do you have a credit for the music that was at the beginning there, Paul?
It's John. John knows the credit for the music.
It's a group that my son was in a decade ago, more than a decade. They were called The Spires.
The Spires.
Story about how they failed to make it. The big chance coincided with the floods. And you can hear my son on it. The lead singer is a guy called Matt Smith. But my son is the bit that goes, So we of course we need permission to play these things. So I asked him to get permission to play it. So
there we go. Tim will be mining their back catalogue as we speak.
They were very good.
My moment of the week, if you follow my social media channels, you will know that today I went and visited some of our businesses in Shildon. I'm a town councillor in Shildon, and that's one of the things you do. You're basically like a state-sanctioned busybody that goes up and talks to people that you'd usually have no business talking to. So I knew a couple of businesses that were doing some good work, so I just went out to say hello. And this business in Shildon, Easy Tech, I was just totally blown away by their community spirit. And it's really frustrating for me because I want to help these businesses, but when you set up a business as a business, you're a profit-making enterprise, it's really difficult to try and get people funding that they should use. So I'm going to have to see if I can help him in other ways, which I'm doing by talking about him here. I'm talking about him to the town council, which I just did in a meeting this afternoon. So basically, this gentleman who is running this business, Easy Tech, it's a computer shop, and they set up 2 weeks before the lockdown, which is, that could break some businesses. And what he decided he was going to do instead is he was going to push his energy towards helping people, and he's going around on Facebook Marketplace and scooping up broken tablets and laptops, driving around on a Sunday, scooping them up, taking them home, fixing them, and then giving them to kids so they can do their schoolwork, and local businesses so that they can sort of try and talk to their customers on social media, which is just a brilliant, it's a wonderful thing for him to do. And it is costing them money, but I said, obviously when you do something like that for somebody, they do remember it, and hopefully he's getting customers for life, so it will come back to reward him in the long term. And the post I've put on about him today on my social media have been very well received, so I do hope that I've been able to help get more people to go down there and help him out and buy stuff.
Some people have been absolutely fantastic during the lockdown, and I think we need to remember. Stuart, moment of the week.
I'm going to take the opportunity to shout out my union. It's Unite Community, and tomorrow will be their online day of action for the Universal Discredit campaign, where basically, it's the 3 demands of ending the 5-week wait on universal credit, getting rid of the sanctions that are basically, needless at this point, and making sure that we retain the increase of the £20 that went to people on universal credit for the COVID crisis, and try and get that out to people on legacy benefits as well. So that's going to be taking place online tomorrow. I'm sure there'll be lots of stuff posted by me.
Fantastic. I have never been able to understand what was going through anybody's head, thinking that somebody who is needing state basic benefits actually could do without money altogether for 5 weeks. You have to have a slate missing upstairs. I think we're going to be talking about this, the government's lack of comprehension about the basics of life, when we come to talk about our first issue as well. Just crazy decisions, and you wonder. So anyway, good luck with that. Stuart Sutherland, you're putting stuff out on your Facebook page, will you be?
I will be, yeah. Also, just join a union. If you're not in a union, join a union now.
Essential, and increasingly essential. And finally, he asked me that I should come to him last because he's been doing all his wizardry on the Paul, moment of the week.
It turns out I didn't need to go last because I did that thing at the start anyway. But I did ask you for that, so I appreciate it. This is my moment of the week, and Samantha might be able to help out as well. So this is a double moment of the week.
Thank brothers. Oh no.
So we got face masks on, and these face masks are causing Conservative Party members to cut up their membership card today, because they feel betrayed because the government have brought in mandatory face masks in shops. Not in schools, by the way. So I've been in schools for the past 2 days, and we still have to, we still are not allowed to wear face masks in school. But, I think personally, even if there's a tiny chance, 0.1% of a chance that it might save someone's life, I think it's worth doing. It's really, really not that difficult. And me and Samantha both own this very fetching "We Shall Overcome" face mask from and this is "We Shall Overcome" is something that Joe Solo and many friends set up, and it's raised over $500,000 for different schemes to help the homeless, all sorts of different things. There'll be more on that on Social Think Tank on Sunday when Joe Solo's is released. But shout out to both face masks in general, the Conservative Party members who were cutting them up, or cutting up their membership cards because they feel betrayed, because they believed what was originally told to them, that they're useless. And now they've obviously changed their mind. And also to Joe Solo for being a good human being. And now we have this as well, this no pass around thing there. So that's quite good as well. So plenty going on there.
Joe Solo is the singer who plays us out at the end of every...
Yeah, and he's also responsible for that little jingle right at the end of the song as well, which is absolutely fantastic and we're delighted about.
Yes, thank you, Joe Solo. And what were you saying about him being on Socialist think tank later this
I've done an interview with Joe on Sunday, and it's a real cracker. It's really good. It was a pleasure to do, and Joe's just a really nice person. And it's like we normally speak entirely about politics or trade unionism, but there's a bit of music in there as well. And it's a nice interview. I enjoyed it.
Well, keep your eyes open for that, people. And now it's time for.
Now it's time for the big story.
I mean, this is just beyond belief.
I know.
Wonderful, isn't it?
We're
This is
living in
what
the
I've been
future, John.
dreaming of.
I did a Pretty Patel smirk. Like I did a half smile.
Danger, danger.
You deserve to smirk, is all I can say. The big story this week, Samantha, how has the Prime Minister caused fury this week?
Oh, man. I mean, this is a story we're going to see repeated over and over again. He's tried to blame care home managers for excess deaths of coronavirus. And we will see them trying to blame teachers when schools start back. If schools start back in September, we'll see them blaming parents for the fact that kids have dropped grades when they've been off school. You know, it's always somebody else's fault, isn't it? Even when you're steering the ship. And this is, it's a divide and conquer. It's a strategy to turn us against each other and to point at each other rather than pointing up at who's making the choices. But I've got friends who work in care homes, as I'm sure a lot of us do, and I could feel their pain. I could feel how betrayed they were. You know, I know people who've told me that they voted Conservative and they work in a care home, and this has shook them because kind of the narrative was that Johnson was like a nice guy. Like, he might not be the type of guy that you actually wanted to have a beer with, but he was harmless and a bit fluffy and a bit silly. But actually they're coming to realise that he is a calculating political animal, and they will get thrown under the bus just like everybody else will. I mean, like I've said before, I'm in the situation where I actually do have a family member who died in a care home with COVID-19, and I don't blame the care home staff. No. And I don't know anybody who else. I know a few people who are in the same position. I don't think anybody does, because we know that the people who work there and the people who manage those facilities do everything they possibly can within their control, and unfortunately, the structures as they were set up were not set up to withstand a pandemic.
I mean, what strikes me, Samantha, is that, first of all, they were releasing people from the NHS who they knew had coronavirus, and others that they weren't quite sure, directly into care homes. They didn't give the care home workers sufficient PPE. They were screaming for PPE for most of those early weeks, because they were trying to do everything to get everything into the NHS and then didn't manage it. Then what happened, they made care home workers who thought they'd had it quarantine, but then, of course, the care homes had to employ agency staff who were being allowed to go from care home to care home. So they picked it up and just spread it around the care homes. And sort of, at the end of the day, the instructions to the care homes were so confused and inadequate that they were having to sort of virtually make it up as they go along. And sort of, after that, for the PM to turn around and say, and of course they got some of the things wrong. So it was outrageous. I mean, why do you think he did that?
I think this is a common tactic of politicians, specifically of Tory politicians, to just shrug off sort of responsibility to somebody else. The whole thing about conservative political ideology is, of course, that the individual should have full freedom and responsibility over their own actions. That's why they've been so soft touch on any imposing like a harsh lockdown, because they were like, well, you really should, but it's not really in the conservative ideology to enforce things like that. And then when people don't do it because of reasons, economic reasons, because your person who's in the gig economy or on a 0 hours contract is disinclined to take 2 weeks off work just because they've got a cough, for financial reasons, that then becomes the fault of the individual rather than the fault of the state.
One thing that I noticed, Sam, is that they do this on everything. They're doing it on face masks in shops at the moment. They announced the rule for us, but then a whole load of government ministers and prominent people blatantly disregard that. And it's almost as though they're inviting people. They daren't impose, and so they impose, but then they invite people to poo-poo the whole thing. Paul, a slap in the face for the care home sector?
Yes, is the simple answer to that. Yes. So we've got the situation very similar to we've seen with other sectors. You know, we've had teachers were the villain, or teaching unions, which actually I take to see as teachers, because teaching is one of the most unionised professions there are. And when they went after the teacher unions just mean the people who work in a place, meaning the teachers. So the teachers are daring to ask to be safe at work, and I remember they were shirking their responsibilities, and yet we were actually in. I remember like being in school and reading about how I was so lazy and wouldn't go to work, and it's quite interesting. But yeah, it's a slap in the face. But I think it's interesting the way the story has evolved, and it's like, do we even care about the truth anymore? Because, you know, if we did really care about the truth, people would be furious, and I think people have grown extremely tired of lies, and so much so that they just resign to them. Like that, it's almost apathy towards them. So, well, that's what they do, isn't it? That's what everyone does. So we had Boris Johnson originally saying that care home workers were, well, not care home workers, but care homes were responsible for this because they let people in with coronavirus. However, if you go back to the guidance at the time, it said that they actually had to do that, and it was part of the strategy, in that if people were discharged, they could still have coronavirus, but they would be discharged into care homes. And we all said, won't that push this virus into care homes and make it very dangerous? And they said, no, it'll be in a separate place. It'll be off to the side somewhere. It'll be secure. It won't be a problem. And it was a problem. It clearly was a problem. But then, after being called out on this, and Boris Johnson was very upset and said, oh no, actually I wasn't saying anything bad about the care homes, even though I just said something bad about the care homes. What I said is none of us could have known that this virus was transmittable by asymptomatic people. But I clearly remember in March having read a number of articles about asymptomatic transmission. And if you go back to January, it's the end of January was the first time they were saying, actually, we think this is transmitted asymptomatically.
So, Paul, what does it mean, transmitted
without symptoms? So,
without knowing about...
Without symptoms. So coronavirus was very, very early on, and it's one of the first things they found very strange about this was that people were transferring it without symptoms. In Parliament the other day, Boris Johnson said, I think it was during Prime Minister's question time, no one could have known it was transmitted asymptomatically, apart from the fact that they did know that. It was discussed at the time about how people without symptoms can transmit this, which is why we had to have that 14-day period. Even if you didn't display any symptoms, you had to, restrict your movements and stay in your home because you could pass it on asymptomatically. And then to sort of go back and say, actually, no one could have known that. It was impossible to know the facts that we stated at the time. And that's why we sent them into the care homes, because no one knew, even though we did. It's just, come on, man. At what point are we just going to say the truth has become so abstract now to this government that, people have just given up hope, I think, and so, well, they're never going to tell the truth.
Stuart, is just today, or was it yesterday, announced an absolutely devastating decision on immigration as well, hasn't he? Which is going to harm the care homes.
Well, they did. They've essentially said that there's no provision for people who work in the adult services, social services, like any provision to get a visa to work here. And most of them are on about 16 grand a year, so they're nowhere near the baseline level of income you need to be getting a visa. So that's completely destroyed any opportunity there. That's about 10% of the posts that need filling are going to go without, and the government's plan is to invest in our own people, which they could have done over the last 10 years without issue. You know what I mean?
It strikes me as being terrifying, Stuart, that what they're doing is they're getting rid of the 10% before they've actually begun to recruit the replacements.
You can't just make people, overnight. Training takes time. Wanting to build a system that creates the right kind of people to take on these jobs, because it isn't a brilliant job. It's a tough job and it doesn't pay well.
Paul?
I have a really novel idea, because this is all based on that threshold of an unskilled worker being paid. It's all on pay, 25,600. Why don't we say that people in care homes are skilled and should be paid more than £25,600 to look after our ill people, our elderly people, the people we love? Maybe, just maybe, that should be considered a skilled profession.
Sam?
This is another lens that we need to look at our response to coronavirus through, is obviously how it's affected women and ethnic minorities, of course, but particularly women. If we look at, if we put money into the care industry, because a lot of people who work in care homes are women, if we put money in there and increase the wages of people who work in care homes, first of all, those would be green jobs. It's part of the green economy. It doesn't create any more pollution or whatever. It increases equality in our society, and those jobs, it's research done by a group called the Women's Budget Group, and they actually said these jobs are actually better for the growth to the economy than putting the same amount of money into construction jobs. So there's a really sound economic reason to raise the pay of people in care homes, not least because when you are in a care home, you don't actually want to be cared for by somebody who's on a minimum wage and just there because they're struggling to get a job elsewhere. They are skilled workers, and we should be treating them as such and valuing them as such and paying them as such.
Definitely. And it's sort of, when you get to my age, you're very aware of the fact that you want good people in the care homes, because it's likely you're going to end up yourself there very shortly. Paul?
Just on that 25,600 threshold, I believe that was brought in so that no person who comes to our country is in the position where they can claim benefits, because this was perceived by the Conservative Party to be a really bad thing when people come over to the UK and claim benefits. And a lot of those people are claiming in-work benefits, meaning that their jobs do not pay them enough to live in a really dignified and secure manner. So why, if that is what the government think is the threshold for 25,600 to live a dignified life, then why in the world is anyone working full time expected to work for less than that?
Absolutely.
We've only just changed the rules for them, that we haven't got them working for free when they had to stay overnight, virtually. And that's only just been the way we've been treating care workers for many years is horrific. The government's pumping billions into helping the care industry, isn't it? Am I right in that? Have they not got big plans for it?
They're always saying that they've got big plans for it, aren't they? They're always saying, oh, we're doing this, we're doing X, Y, and Z. It's a really complex issue. and there's complex issues of privatization. There's complex issues of people running these businesses for a profit. Some owners are really ethical and do some really good things. Like my best friend sets up care homes, not for the elderly, but for people who are, maybe have a learning difficulty or had a really difficult time in the past. And it does a really good job and a really ethical job, but there's an argument there as to whether that money should be able to go towards profit as well. Is that the best thing? Obviously, that person's doing an extremely good job and is extremely good at his job, and so all the people that work with him. But there's another argument there as well, and they're always pumping billions more in. But I'll come back to this numbers thing. Do people really understand numbers? Because a billion, for some people, it sounds like a big billion. Some people think, well, actually, a billionaire, they've earned it, and you could. Yeah, it's 1,000 million, so you could spend $1 million 1,000 times over, and that's $1 billion. It's such an astronomical amount of money that for an individual, but people are willing to justify that. Well, they've earned that money, that's fine, and if they want to put that in the Cayman Islands and not pay tax, who should be telling them to pay tax? But then you go back to it and you'll say, well, we're putting $1 billion into care homes, and well, $1 billion over that number of people becomes a much smaller figure. So why is it okay for an individual to have $1 billion and not pay tax on it, but then $1 billion goes into a lot of money and people are like, oh, they put $1 billion in, and it's people's understanding of numbers. And I say this as a maths teacher, not to try to be patronising, but human beings aren't designed to understand numbers so big. Generally, people kind of can understand what fits into a football stadium because they can see it. They know what 40,000 people, or even 80,000 if you go to Wembley, they know what that looks like, but they don't understand what $1 billion looks like because we've never seen $1 billion.
You were talking about this last week when you said, we're going to have each child going to school and they're going to spend 2 minutes getting ready to be sort of get their hands washed. And sort of, if you have a school of 800 people, that means that the last person will be at the end of the queue will be getting in after lunch. And it's when you sort of see these things and they're out working. Thank you, everybody. That's some smashing thoughts about how the government have really let down our care system. It's in desperate need of funding, not reform or restructuring, just a proper funding. And if it were to get proper funding, then it could pay proper wages. And if it were to pay proper wages, a lot of these problems would go away. We've got another jingle, Paul.
Yeah.
I can't believe the news today. Oh, I can't close my eyes and let it go.
Some problem with the suppression there, but so thank you very much, Paul. It's sort of very exciting. It's not your fault. It's Zoom's fault. But then, Paul, it's your go. Who's been serving up 2 small portions to save the economy?
Oh, it's Mr. Sunak, the saviour of the country, and he's becoming very, very popular, Mr. Sunak.
Richmond MP. Richmond.
He is an MP from Richmond, and
Yes.
He was also very much implicated in one of the companies that is very, very, very deeply involved in the 2008 financial crisis that actually caused it. So it's very interesting that, the way Iceland dealt with the people who were heavily implicated in that was to jail them, and we put them in charge of the economy. But that's us, I suppose. But Mr. Sunak's done a few little tweaks to the budget. There are some interesting ones. There was some. You can kind of get behind quite a few of them in principle. I think the one around paying companies to retain jobs. I think wasn't it £1,000 if they kept their employee on to a certain stage. There is still a cut-off where they can just say, right, we are going to sack you, because we saw quite a few firms taking furlough money and then getting rid of the jobs anyway. And there's an incentive for people to keep the jobs, those jobs going for a little while longer, which is a good thing. We want to see people in jobs. Perhaps it could have been done differently, but I'm not going to go too hard
There's
on
some
that.
criticism there, Paul, of the Chancellor, because he's paying them the money at the end of the process, when really it's we're in a situation where if they've kept them on, they're just going to get sort of a gift of £1,000. But they've clearly had the ability and the money and the order stream to be able to keep them on anyway, because they're giving them the money at the end of the process. It would have made more sense, surely, to give them the money up front and then require them to keep that job open, because they need that money to keep those workers on. We're seeing an awful lot of, as we come out of furlough, I've explained this before, you don't get your bankruptcies during the crisis. The firms hunker down and survive the crisis, but when they're trying to come out of the crisis, they find that they've not got the savings to be able to keep their cash flow going. And it's then that they have the problems, and it's then that they fail. They fail coming out of the crisis. So we're going to be seeing, there's a danger, let's put it that way, that we're going to be seeing a lot of firms failing in the next few weeks as we come out of the crisis, because they're going to be unable to get things going and people are going to start pressing. So we're going to see an awful lot of people who were furloughed, but who are having to be laid off because the firm is having to restructure because it hasn't got the cash flow to sort.
I think we're also seeing socialism for the rich again, because this is every employee, every company can claim this £1,000. And it was interesting, right at the very, very beginning of this crisis, there was a tax break given to some big firms, and it was somewhere in the region of 690 million was claimed by Tesco, that should have gone into the public. Should have gone into public funds. I hate saying taxpayer funds, by the way, because taxpayer funds makes it seem like we give the government money and then they decide how to do it, but that's actually not how it works, apart from if you're in Robin Hood. But it's like a very old way of doing it. That's not how economies work. But they're giving public money away to these big firms who are giving it away to their shareholders as an extra bonus. They didn't need that. Tesco didn't need that because they haven't suffered. It was all like during the first month of the crisis. Oh, it's our best month since Christmas. This is the best month we've ever had outside of Christmas for ever. So they didn't need that. But they took that tax break. They could have gone into public money. And yet I saw small business people really, really struggling, not knowing where the next bit of money was coming from. And it seems to be, if you're a massive firm, a massive company, you get quite a lot from this government. And that magic money tree that was so fabled during both the 2017 and 2019 elections can be found for them. And so that's basically the way economies work. You can do that.
There's been definite winners and losers, and one of the criticisms of the original schemes that he introduced was that they were just blanket across the economy, and it didn't take into any account of the fact that different sectors have been affected differently. Let's look at some of the things he did and see what you got to think of it. Sam, a £2 billion kickstart job creation scheme for youth, including a grant of £2,000 per annum per apprentice. Surely you've got to give him some credit for that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the way this is how it works, isn't it? They sound good until you look at the details. The details generally aren't actually available until quite further down the line. But, we're talking about creating jobs specifically for young people, jobs that don't currently exist. So if they don't currently exist, why don't they currently exist? Are we inventing jobs for this scheme that people aren't actually going to be paid enough to live on? It's just a bit weird. And again, I am frustrated because we know how to improve the economy. There are loads of, like I said, the Women's Budget Group, and there's loads of other groups and organisations who research policy all the time. And if you ask anybody who researches policy and is involved in something like the Citizens Rights Bureau, a really favoured approach to from them is to increase child benefit. Because most houses get child benefit, there's no paperwork to it, and what people need is money in their pockets to spend on what they need to spend, and that's what our economy needs. Is it needs to move. I was sat there through the announcement, sitting listening to these humongous numbers and thinking, how is it possible that he's announced all of this stuff and I've still got absolutely nought? You know, I don't own my own house. I'm not going to buy a house anytime soon. I actually do run a business. I've got a business premises. We were pretty happy to start with. The £10,000 we got through the business rate scheme is really good. And we've burned through that now. And my business, we can sort of operate on a social distance. I mean, our model is basically around getting groups of parents together. So we can help parents on a one-on-one basis, but we can't do that and get enough money to keep our business open. And we rely on volunteers who are parents who can't volunteer for us until their kids go back to school. So we literally have had to give notice on our business premises, and we're going to have to, we're in between, do we get another premises? We've seen some good ones, or do we literally put the whole business, put half the business in sort of suspended animation until schools go back, and just do, like I said, a little bit of one-on-one stuff where we can. It's really frustrating. It's really frustrating because there's lots of people like me who want to do things, but somehow the help isn't being directed to us. And it is going to places like Tesco and Wetherspoons, and you just think, come on.
But it took him ages to eventually to help self-employed people at all, didn't
well,
it?
I mean, they weren't going to. This is another thing. They weren't going to, and the reason they did was because of such a big hoo-ha was made over it. And this is another way this government acts, isn't it? It leaks out bits of policy, and then if they get reacted to badly in the media, they change it and they tweak it slightly right before it goes out. And that's why they aren't
I thought they
able
were
to
following the science, Sam. I thought this government followed
the science that says do and also don't wear a mask at the same time. You know, it's all right for some of us who've got two faces, but for those of us with only one, we have to choose.
Stuart, here's another thing. Job centre work coach numbers to be doubled.
Ooh, well, that indicates that there's going to be more people needing coaching to look for jobs, which means a more competitive job market, which likely means worse wages and conditions for workers and a shift away from older workers to younger workers because you can pay them less. So that's not a good sign for anyone.
I really object to this because it rather assumes that if you can't get a job because the economy is collapsing, it's your fault. What you need is coaching. And if you were just coached, you'd be able to get one of these non-existent jobs because there's jobs out there. So it's not the economy that's suffering. And it's all part of a desensitizing of the system and laying the blame on the individual rather than the situation. Paul?
Just to link in with what you were saying there, it's very much to do with this aspiration as well. And we're told in schools a lot of, like, they talk about white working class boys, which actually I think it's really, really divisive thing to say, because what's the difference between a white working class boy and a black working class boy? Actually, it's the working class bit that's important, because you know, those people have very similar issues, and if you look at it, there's no difference between skin colour in that one. But you know, they will say, well, you know, they lack aspiration. They lack aspiration. Tell you this for nothing. No one lacks aspiration, like to have a nice life, have a nice job, but they might lack opportunity to do something with it. So if they're saying, well, you've got, they don't aspire to be a doctor, or they don't aspire to be a lawyer, or they don't aspire to be a hedge fund manager. It's like, well, how many of these jobs are there out there? And what's wrong with doing a nice, sensible job? Or what's wrong with doing a manufacturing job? Oh, hang on, there aren't really that many of those anymore, or as many as there used to be. And it's opportunity that's limiting people, not aspiration.
Okay, Paul. Now I'll give you the next one then. Talking about proper jobs. £3 billion for decarbonising housing and public building. Now, surely you've got to agree with that. Surely you've got to say that's a smashing thing.
Glad they're doing it. I think it's estimated that 14 billion is what's necessary to do that. And again, to talk about big numbers and things like that, like 3 billion. Yeah, on the scale of an economy the size of ours, it isn't a huge amount, although it sounds like a huge amount. And I do get that, although it sounds like a really, really big amount of money. It's a massive amount of money. 3 billion. Hang on, that's almost like, well, it's almost as a Richard Branson, isn't it?
Almost as much.
You spend a Richard Branson on that. That's where we are. There are people that are that individually wealthy, or Jeff Bezos's case, wealthier than a lot of nations, which is absurd. But then so yeah, it's good. It's good. They're also spending 2 million on some other green scheme. 2 million.
Yeah, I have a big problem with this, Paul, because there's many more things they should have given that money for. Stimulating a sort of a cashback, a scrappage scheme for cars if you were buying an electric vehicle. I mean, we could have really used that to stimulate.
That wouldn't work well with the oil companies, though.
No, it's dependent. Right, I'll give you just you got 15 seconds to explode, and then I move on to Stuart for the last one. Cutting stamp duty. Surely that's
oh my God! I mean, this is one of those. I mean, thank you so much. Like I said, as somebody who has rented my whole adult life because I haven't been able to scrape together to buy a deposit in Shildon, where I can buy a house for £60,000, right? Increasing the threshold for stamp duty will not affect any. There is literally not a house for sale in Shildon that I could spend that much money on to save any money at all. And we're talking about, the amount of money saved for those people versus how much they're spending on that house, and therefore how much their annual income must be. I understand it's about getting people to buy houses, and that does stimulate the economy, but
how?
It's in the wrong way.
Well, that's the thing.
I was talking about buying new houses, mind.
But if you buy new houses, it does falsely stimulate the economy, doesn't it? It does, it seems that more money's circulating, and more money's being invented by banks, because every time a mortgage is created, that's just the numbers on the screen that you now owe the bank. So the bank has created money, so it's a form of money creation, but what it's doing it in private debt. So it's a really, really complex thing. But again, it is not a good way to stimulate. It doesn't put money in people's pockets. It puts money in the bank's pockets that ends up in the Cayman Islands, and then.
Last one, Stuart. VAT cut from 20% to 5% in the hospitality industry. Again, surely. You've been very negative, people, about everything this poor chap's done. He's trying his hardest. The down. Surely, Stuart, this is a good thing.
Why did they just land on 5? Did it just sound like a good number? Does that sound impressive? 20 down to 5. Is that what they're going for?
I don't know why.
It's got to be better than the vouchers. It's got to be better than giving them, half-price vouchers to stimulate the hospitality industry.
Well, that's the silliest thing known, isn't it, really?
And let them eat cake.
For people who
Let them eat cake.
anyway, or people who are willing to risk catching the virus. And you know, like I went to the pub the other day, sat outside at the Castle Eden Inn, which is really nice. And they were doing a really good job of social distancing. A fantastic job. I didn't go near to anyone else. It was really good. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gone in because we're out going to walk with our dog. It's good, but you know, I want to see those businesses continue. I want to do that, but it seems to, again, if you can afford it, you can get everything half price. If you're willing to risk it, you can get everything half price.
You could anywhere. I mean, you could go on the internet and get a Groupon, to be honest. Yeah. Everybody's been doing this already. This isn't a new idea. Yeah. Boris has just got the world's biggest Groupon voucher and he's sharing it with us.
Yeah, but
I'm going to interrupt, Paul, sorry. We need to move on from this topic. Just before we go, I just want, in one sentence, people, what would you have wanted him to do to kickstart the economy again? Start with you, Paul. Just one thing you would have wanted him to do that he didn't.
Green New Deal.
Stuart, one thing.
Quit.
Sorry?
If you could quit.
Samantha, one thing you would have wanted to see the Chancellor do that he hasn't?
Yeah, I would have raised child benefit.
But
I don't think that's a very conservative thing to do.
Pay the NHS more instead of just clapping them. Right, last topic. Stuart, who is planning to shake the institution we've all just been applauding?
Boris again, or Dominic Cummings, or whoever really runs the show. They're going to be getting rid of trusts and merging them into different groupings and making them more powerful and bringing them under government control.
Good or bad?
Well, you're essentially just making more powerful government-aligned players in the NHS. That's not a good thing, is it, for patients if government decisions are kind of leading clinical decisions a certain direction?
I mean, what they're trying to do is they're trying to give the government more control over the NHS. They've not been satisfied with the way the NHS has responded during the crisis, and so they're trying to give themselves more control over it so it'll be more responsive. Sam, good idea or bad idea?
Well, like many things can be a very good idea until you apply a conservative ideology to them. So the idea of universal credit could have been a good idea if it was done on a different sort of set of ideals. The reason the NHS is like it is, the reason it's hard to transfer information from one department to another department is because we've created this fake internal market structure, which is what the Conservatives have wanted all this time, and now they've realised why it doesn't work, because in a time of crisis you don't want to be dealing with 6 million GDPR forms just to transfer one patient from one hospital to another hospital, and you want to be able to access their healthcare records without jumping through loads of hoops with their GP surgery. I don't know the ins and outs because it is very complicated the way the NHS is structured. I would like to see it run in a better, more nationalised, direct way, but I don't trust the Tories to do it.
Paul, is this the time for a radical restructure anyway?
I think the NHS have just been through something massive. It was very, very difficult for them to procure PPE. That was the government responsibility. They did try to blame it on trusts and what have you, but you know there was a national shortage. They ran a national simulation to find that actually there wasn't. You know, we weren't prepared for a pandemic. It was the government's responsibility to do that. It's a very interesting change in ideology from the Conservatives, and I don't think I've seen this mentioned anywhere else. But a few years ago, because NHS was such a strength for the Labour Party, they were saying, why don't we have a cross-party approach? Why don't we agree to that? And a lot of people agree with that idea that if you depoliticise this really political thing, the NHS, then then maybe you could have more a more long-term plan rather than parliament to parliament, and then everything changes. And they wanted to have kind of less control of the NHS and more power to the structures and basically almost like the civil service of the NHS. And they've gone completely around on that, and they want to take it back into control. And it does make me think we've got this deal coming up with the USA. There's a push to privatise. There has been a long time in the Conservative Party. There are so many of the people who are involved in the Conservative Party who have private healthcare interests, and it just makes me think: is this going to be part of the deal? We were told all sorts of things. We were told that that there would never be any danger to food standards, food hygiene standards, and yet, that's going to be part of the deal now. And they've all voted for it willingly, even though it was in the manifesto that they wouldn't. And then they said during the election campaign, "Oh, our NHS is safe. American interests won't be in there." I can see this being a real gateway, and so actually, you are going to have to accept Big Pharma. You are going to have to select that type of pill, even though there's a generic one that's 7 times cheaper. You've got to choose this one. And I think this is what people I think the Labour Party really failed to articulate this during the election. When they were talking about privatisation of the NHS, they weren't talking about us turning up and suddenly having to pay, even though some doctor surgeries were doing that. What we're talking about is actually the money that's spent in the NHS being spent less wisely, so you get a poorer service. And then you have to then go private for certain aspects of it. And one of those things is if you pay for your prescriptions and turn up and pay for your prescription, then you get, instead of brand A, you get brand X, and brand X is 7 times the price because we've got a deal. We've got an agreement with the USA Big Pharma firm that is who's going to supply it. And that is what those firms are interested in. Imagine them looking at that and saying, the government are going to pay for that. This is going to cost these people, I think it's £9 for a prescription now, £9, but we charge £170 for this amount of pills, but you'll get it for £9, and the government picks up the rest of the tab, which the money goes away, and then they say, oh, we're spending record amounts on the NHS. Look at us, we're putting more and more money into the NHS, but in a really, really unwise way. How in the world do we articulate that? That's the important thing that we need to learn how to do.
Just we are running out of time. Last word to Stuart on this. I've got 2 questions for you. Do you think, Stuart, that this is just an alternative, having a big talk about how we're going to restructure the NHS just is an alternative to actually spending some more money on it and keeping their promises about new staff and new building?
Absolutely. I mean, the real restructure we need is just funding it properly. That would be, the most radical thing we could possibly do for it. We've seen the promises have been broken. We're not going to see those new hospitals. We're not getting those new staff. And,
And they're not getting a pay rise.
No. France got a pay rise today, didn't they? Yeah.
The French Health Service. Yeah.
Can I just ask you one more question, Stuart, as well, before we go? And I have to say this is just speculation at the moment. It's even speculation about whether they're going to have all this sort of big restructuring and big disruption. Are we being too negative on the government too soon, do you think?
God,
you
no.
don't trust them?
No, you can't trust the government. It doesn't matter. To be honest, it doesn't matter who's in power. Just, constant scrutiny is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to question everything. Otherwise, you just lambs to the slaughter. And
on that bombshell, we will. Thank you, Stuart. That's just what you've done is you've just justified political unmuted. Exactly why we're here. Thank you very much indeed. That is it for today, people. Can I say thank you to just these three wonderful people who I'm continually interrupting and shutting them up so I can let one of the other ones speak. Thank you so much for putting up with me. You've been fantastic today. Next week we are joined by an extra guest, the amazing Mel Wilson. So that's going to be really good. And we slowly, people, crank up to what we used to be. We're taking it very easy and slowly, but sort of we're going to slowly get there. Thank you very much for your patience with us. And we're going to play out with the amazing Joe Solo, who is being interviewed this weekend on Socialist Think Tank. Watch out for the podcast. And sort of what's become our theme tune, really. No pass around. God bless you, people. Thank you so much.
My name is Jack Atkinson. I'm not afraid, and I live and die by this vow that I made. The only good fascist, a dead one, they say, and around Maria we are. When I first left all them months ago, told him I'd come not to kill but to cure. But for an ambulance driver my shot's pretty sure. And around Maria we are. There'll be no Basuran, no Basuran, no Basuran today. The fascists have come for our freedom. We ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no Basuran here today. I told my mother now, mother be strong. For the left way is right and the right way is wrong. And you can stick that on my grave when I'm gone. For around Maria we are. There'll be no Basuran, no Basuran, no Basuran today. The fascists have come for our freedom. We ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no Basuran here today. Cast may be cast, and the cast may be cast, but you armies of darkness, you best do your worst. 'Cause to win, yeah, well, you gotta get past those first. And around Maria we are. There'll be no Basuran, no Basuran, no Basuran today. The fascists have come for our freedom. We ain't gonna give it away. There'll be no Basuran here, no Basuran, no Basuran, no Basuran today. No Basuran, no Basuran, no Basuran today. No Basuran, no Basuran.
See you later, everyone. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
the red flag fly.